My husband looked at me and said, "My ex is joining us for Thanksgiving. Be mature about it." I didn't scream, I just nodded. Of course. What Jordan didn't know was that while he expected a compliant wife, I had already invited his ex's hidden fiancé to join us. Have you ever been told you're overreacting just because you had normal boundaries? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. The moment Jordan's breathing leveled out into a deep, steady rhythm, I slipped out of bed. I didn't pace the floor or splash cold water on my face to wake myself up from a nightmare. This wasn't a nightmare. This was an audit. I walked into the home office and opened his laptop. Jordan had always been careless, leaving his digital footprint wide open because he assumed I was too trusting to ever look. He was right, until he wasn't. Bypassing his weak passwords took less than a minute. I opened his messages, my eyes scanning the screen with the detachment of an accountant reviewing a fraudulent ledger. There it was. Weeks of deeply inappropriate, nostalgic texts between him and Ashley. They weren't just catching up, they were reliving their past. He told her she was the only one who understood his stress. She told him she missed the way he held her. Every message was a boundary crossed, a contract breached. I didn't wake him up to scream. I didn't throw his laptop across the room. I simply opened a secure, hidden folder and started taking screenshots. I documented every inside joke, every complaint about me, every late-night confession. I forwarded the entire archive to a secure server. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was evidence gathering. But I didn't stop at his messages. If Ashley was suddenly lingering around my husband, I needed to know exactly who she was today. I pulled up her social media profiles. She had restricted her main accounts, but people like her always leave a trail. It took me less than 2 hours of digital sleuthing to find the anomaly. A tagged photo on a distant relative's page, a comment on a local restaurant's review, and then the undeniable proof. Ashley wasn't the lonely, depressed single woman Jordan claimed she was. She was engaged. His name was Matthew. He looked completely normal, completely unaware of the double life his future bride was leading. Finding Matthew's contact information required a bit more digging, but by 3 a.m, I had his professional email and his direct phone number. I sat in the glow of the computer screen, the house perfectly silent around me. I had all the puzzle pieces. Now, it was just a matter of assembling the trap. I drafted a brief, factual message to Matthew. No emotion, no hysteria, just the cold, hard facts of the situation, accompanied by a small sample of the screenshots. I hit send. I watched the progress bar complete, knowing that on the other side of the city, a man's world was about to shift just as mine had. By the time dawn broke, Matthew had replied. He was devastated, confused, and desperate for the truth. We spoke on the phone for 20 minutes. His voice was shaking, but mine was steady. I walked him through exactly what we were going to do. I established a firm alliance with him before the sun even fully rose over the horizon. When Jordan woke up the next morning, stretched, and kissed my forehead, thanking me for being such a supportive and understanding partner about the Thanksgiving arrangements, I smiled back. I poured him his coffee exactly the way he liked it. My response wasn't a surrender. It was the calculated closing of a steel trap. He thought he was managing a naive wife. He had no idea he was dealing with an auditor who had just balanced the books. People always ask why women stay silent in the exact moment of betrayal. Why I just stood in the kitchen, stirring the pasta, nodding along while my husband invited his ex-girlfriend to my family's Thanksgiving dinner. The truth is, I had been conditioned to stay quiet. I had been the silent investor in our version of family for years. I paid 80% of the household bills. I covered the mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, and the spontaneous vacations Jordan insisted he needed for his mental health. I maintained the comfortable, upper-middle-class lifestyle he enjoyed, while he contributed barely 20%. I had treated our marriage like a partnership, but I was the only one footing the bill. Jordan didn't just drain my bank account, he drained my reality. Manipulators like him are brilliant at weaponizing modern therapy speak. They take words that are meant to foster healthy communication and twist them into psychological traps. When he told me to be mature about Ashley, he was executing a flawless gaslighting maneuver. By demanding maturity, he framed my normal, healthy boundaries as a character flaw. If I objected to his ex-girlfriend coming to my parents' home, I wasn't protecting my marriage. I was being insecure, toxic, and unevolved. He used the language of emotional intelligence to normalize absolute cruelty. It is a paralyzing trap. When your partner looks you in the eye and tells you that your discomfort is a symptom of your own inadequacy, you start to doubt your own sanity. You swallow your outrage because you don't want to be the crazy wife. You normalize the disrespect because society tells you that a mature woman doesn't let the past bother her. That is the true danger of a manipulator. They don't just cross your boundaries, they convince you that having boundaries in the first place makes you a bad person. So I stayed silent in the kitchen. I didn't explode because the psychological weight of his manipulation had temporarily frozen me. But silence is not the same as compliance. As I stirred that pasta, the fog of his gaslighting began to burn away. I realized that my investment in this marriage had yielded zero returns. The affection had been a subscription, and I had been paying for premium access to a man who was funneling his emotional capital to someone else. I stopped trying to summon sadness. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt financially and emotionally swindled. The moment I recognized the mechanics of his trap, his power over me evaporated. I wasn't a jealous wife throwing a tantrum. I was a majority shareholder preparing for a hostile takeover. He wanted maturity. I was about to show him exactly how methodical and cold true maturity could be. The realization washed over me like ice water. I wasn't going to fight him for his love. I was going to systematically dismantle the comfortable life I had built for him. I thought back to the countless times I had suppressed my own needs to accommodate his fabricated crises. Every time he claimed he needed space, every time he insisted his late nights at the office were just part of the grind. It was all a carefully constructed facade, subsidized by my hard work. I had been funding my own deception. But the ledger was open now. I looked at the kitchen island, at the stainless steel appliances I had paid for, at the imported tiles I had picked out. Jordan was living in a sanctuary of my making, and he had the audacity to invite his past right through the front door. He relied on my adherence to politeness, assuming I would simply absorb the humiliation to keep the peace during the holidays. He miscalculated. Jordan didn't just stop at inviting Ashley. He escalated his manipulation to ensure I had no allies. A few days before Thanksgiving, I discovered he had gone completely behind my back to my parents, Patricia and Richard. He had visited their upscale suburban home while I was at work and spun a masterful, tragic tale. He painted Ashley as a severely depressed, isolated victim who had absolutely nobody else in the world. He positioned himself as a selfless savior, a white knight rushing to aid a fragile soul. More strategically, he subtly framed me as the cold, unsupportive wife who lacked empathy for a woman in crisis. He actually convinced my mother that it would be a charitable act to welcome Ashley to our family table. His audacity peaked when he casually suggested to me that I should cook Ashley's favorite side dishes to make her feel extra welcome. He wanted me to act as the catering service for his emotional affair. Instead of arguing, I smiled. I wrote down the grocery list and told him I would make sure everything was perfect. Then, I drove straight to the office of the most ruthless family law attorney in the city. Her name was Evelyn, and she didn't deal in emotions. She dealt in assets and absolute destruction. I sat in her pristine, glass-walled conference room and handed over the financial documents, the bank statements, and the digital archives of Jordan's infidelity. The narrative officially shifted from personal heartbreak to cold, legal strategy. Evelyn and I drafted the divorce papers that same afternoon. We mapped out a plan to aggressively secure the assets I had worked so hard to accumulate. While family courts usually favor an equal split, Evelyn knew his documented misuse of marital funds to finance an affair gave us the ultimate leverage to force an 80-20 settlement in my favor. I spent the next few days operating on two entirely different planes of existence. In the shadows, I was working with my bank to freeze our joint credit lines, securing the title to my properties, and legally severing the financial arteries that kept Jordan afloat. In the light, I was the ultimate accommodating holiday hostess. I went to the premium butcher and bought the perfect 20-pound organic turkey. I polished the crystal glasses and ironed the linen napkins for my parents' dining room table. I smiled through the endless Thanksgiving preparations, basting the turkey and coordinating side dishes while Jordan strutted around, completely oblivious to the legal guillotine hanging over his neck. He thought my pleasant demeanor was proof that his gaslighting had worked. He genuinely believed he had successfully managed me into submission. He had no idea that every time I smiled at him, I was mentally reviewing the clauses of our impending divorce decree. I was basting a turkey, but I was also preparing to roast my husband. The contrast between his manufactured reality and the impending legal devastation was almost intoxicating. He would text Ashley right in front of me, thinking he was so clever, so stealthy. I would just offer him a fresh cup of coffee and ask if he needed anything else. I didn't need to yell or demand respect. I had outsourced my vengeance to a legal professional. My anger had been completely commodified into actionable, structural retaliation. I was no longer a wife dealing with a cheating husband. I was a corporation liquidating a toxic asset. The true depth of Jordan's depravity wasn't revealed in his text messages. It was revealed in the accounting. 2 days before Thanksgiving, while meticulously reviewing our joint bank statements for my attorney, I noticed a discrepancy. It was buried deep in the transaction history, disguised as a routine transfer to a secondary savings account we rarely used. I followed the digital paper trail. The money hadn't stayed in savings. It had been wired to an external account. $12,000. Jordan hadn't just been emotionally cheating on me. He had secretly funneled $12,000 of our hard-earned joint funds directly to Ashley. I sat at my desk, staring at the glowing numbers on my monitor. The screen blurred for a fraction of a second before my vision snapped back into absolute razor-sharp focus. I cross-referenced the date of the wire transfer with the timeline I had built from Matthew's information. The kill shot materialized right in front of me. This massive sum of money wasn't for Ashley's fabricated depression. It wasn't to help her pay rent or cover therapy bills. The $12,000 was the exact amount required for the venue deposit for Ashley and Matthew's upcoming wedding. The realization was staggering. Jordan was literally stealing from his own wife to play the ultimate provider for his ex-girlfriend's wedding to another man. He was subsidizing her new life with my paycheck. He wanted to be her white knight so desperately that he committed profound financial betrayal against our marriage to maintain her illusion of perfection. He was lying to me, and Ashley was lying to Matthew, using my money to secure an upscale venue for a marriage built on deceit. This crossed the line from standard infidelity into profound financial betrayal. I didn't feel a shred of sorrow. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a prosecutor uncovering the smoking gun. This $12,000 betrayal was the final nail in his coffin. It removed any lingering societal pressure I might have felt to show mercy or handle things quietly. Evelyn, my attorney, was thrilled. This documented transfer gave us the leverage to legally eviscerate him. I printed the bank statements, highlighted the fraudulent transfer in bright yellow ink, and slipped the documents into a sleek leather portfolio. I placed the portfolio right next to the freshly drafted divorce papers. Jordan had weaponized my bank account to fund his narcissistic fantasy. He had treated my financial security as a slush fund for his ego. The upcoming Thanksgiving dinner was no longer just about exposing an affair. It was about executing a full-scale financial and social repossession. He thought he was buying Ashley's affection. He was actually purchasing his own absolute destruction. I took a deep breath, the air feeling cleaner and colder in my lungs. There is a profound sense of peace that arrives when you finally see a person exactly for who they are, stripped of all their charm and manipulation. Jordan wasn't a complex man struggling with his past. He was a parasite. He had leached off my stability, my income, and my familial goodwill to feed his own twisted hero complex. I carefully logged out of the banking portal and closed the laptop. I walked into the kitchen and checked on the prep work for the holiday meal. The silver was polished, the crystal was gleaming, everything was set for a picture-perfect Thanksgiving. The stage was immaculately prepared for the final act. Thanksgiving Day arrived with the crisp, golden perfection typical of late autumn. My parents' upscale suburban home smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and expensive wine. The dining room table was a lavish spread of crystal glasses, silver platters, and the chaotic warmth of family traditions. I played the gracious hostess, pouring drinks and managing the kitchen, while my brother Ryan watched football with my dad. Ashley arrived just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She walked through the front door wearing a smug, practiced smile, acting overly familiar with my husband. She immediately gravitated toward Jordan, touching his arm when she laughed, speaking a little too loudly, and making a grand show of being the fragile, grateful guest. Jordan beamed, playing the benevolent protector. I watched them perform their little charade with the emotional detachment of an anthropologist observing a lesser species. The tension in the room steadily built, completely invisible to the villains, but entirely orchestrated by me. I checked my watch. 2:44. I stepped out of the kitchen and moved toward the foyer just as the doorbell rang at exactly 2:45. I announced cheerfully that I would get it, cutting off Jordan before he could move. I pulled open the heavy oak door. Matthew stood there, looking sharp, nervous, and utterly determined. I welcomed him warmly, gesturing for him to come inside. I led him directly into the formal dining room, where Jordan and Ashley were holding court in front of my parents and brother. I spoke clearly, my voice cutting through the chatter like a scalpel, introducing a special surprise guest to everyone. I introduced Matthew as Ashley's fiancé. The power dynamic flipped in a fraction of a second. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. Ashley dropped her wine glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, dark red pooling like blood. Jordan literally stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. This is the lethal mechanics of a narcissistic injury. Manipulators like Jordan and Ashley thrive exclusively in the shadows. They rely on the social contract of politeness to get away with their cruelty. They count on their victims staying quiet to keep the peace. But when you expose a narcissist under the bright, unforgiving lights of a public audience, you destroy their false persona. You strip away their carefully constructed masks in front of the exact people they were trying to impress. Deprived of their shadows, they instantly self-destruct. Ashley panicked, her depressed victim persona shattering instantly. She stammered, trying to spin a web of lies, claiming Matthew was just a friend. Jordan, desperate to salvage his white knight facade, loudly insisted that Ashley had told him she was single and alone. Their contradictory lies collided mid-air. They turned on each other like cornered rats, screaming accusations and exposing their own deceit. My parents watched in absolute horror as the truth laid itself bare. Jordan wasn't a savior, he was a thief. Ashley wasn't depressed, she was a fraud. Matthew stood tall, looking at the woman he almost married, with pure disgust. The spotlight had been turned on, and the roaches were scattering. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to shed a single tear. I just stood there, holding a crystal water glass, watching them publicly execute their own reputations. By bringing Matthew into the light, I had turned Jordan's demand for maturity into the ultimate weapon against him. He had wanted a polite, mature holiday. I delivered one. It was the most mature, clinical dismantling of a toxic relationship I could possibly engineer. The silence that followed their screaming match was the sound of absolute victory. Matthew didn't yell. He simply looked at Ashley, shook his head in disgust, and said they were completely done and she should not contact him. He turned to me, nodded his thanks, and walked out the front door, leaving Ashley sobbing in the middle of the ruined Thanksgiving spread. She fled seconds later, unable to face the searing judgment of my family. That left Jordan, standing alone in my parents' dining room, stripped of his allies, his money, and his lies. He opened his mouth to apologize, to spin one last desperate manipulation. I didn't let him speak. I walked over to my bag, pulled out the sleek leather portfolio, and dropped the divorce papers onto the dining room table, right next to the cranberry sauce he had asked me to make. I told him I wanted him out of my house by tonight, my voice cold and absolute. I informed him the asset division settlement was strictly 80-20 in my favor. Furthermore, I stated my lawyer had already documented the $12,000 he stole from our joint savings to fund his ex-girlfriend's wedding venue. I told him this was a textbook dissipation of marital assets, and if he didn't sign the 80-20 settlement tonight, we would drag his entire public humiliation into open court. Jordan looked at the bank statements highlighted in yellow. He looked at my parents, who stared at him with undisguised contempt. He looked at my brother Ryan, who was quietly standing between Jordan and the door, ready to physically remove him if necessary. Realizing he had absolutely no leverage and nowhere to hide, Jordan grabbed his coat and left. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, sealing my freedom. The divorce proceeded exactly as I had orchestrated. Jordan had no capital to fight me. I secured my assets, retrieved my funneled $12,000, and erased him from my life completely. The ensuing weeks were quiet, productive, and wonderfully mundane. My house was finally my own again. The air felt lighter without the suffocating weight of his constant manipulation. I've come to realize that society has a very twisted definition of maturity. People will tell you that being mature means keeping the peace at all costs. They will tell you that forgiveness is the higher path, and that you should swallow your pride to maintain harmony, especially during the holidays. But true maturity isn't accepting disrespect to make other people comfortable. True maturity is having the quiet, unshakable strength to draw a line in the sand and enforce it without a shred of hesitation. It is the ability to look at a toxic situation, remove your emotional attachment, and treat it like a bad business investment that needs to be ruthlessly liquidated. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, the only way to set yourself free is to let the people who hurt you publicly destroy themselves. You don't have to scream, throw things, or seek petty, chaotic revenge. You just have to turn on the lights, step out of the way, and let the undeniable truth do all the heavy lifting. I lost a deceitful husband, but I gained back my financial security, my self-respect, and my absolute peace of mind. I learned that you cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick, and you certainly cannot build a future with someone who is secretly funding their past. As I sat in my quiet, beautiful home, I finally felt the profound warmth of genuine independence. If you've ever had to cut a toxic person out of your life, drop A in the comments and hit subscribe. Never let anyone gaslight you into accepting less than you deserve.